Cool. So we're just about to get started in the next couple of minutes. We've got a couple of talks, then we've got another break for some more food, and then we've got another talk, and then you can go have some more food. All right. Make sure you keep your fluids and your food up. Whatever. I don't know the word. It's just pig out. All right. Cool. So just a reminder. There's a couple of things I just want to just to make sure you guys don't forget. Joined in. All right, is that really cool website, joind.in. Go to Joined In and rate the talks that we've seen. We've got a few ratings come through, but not as many as there are people here. So go and rate the people, give them some feedback, tell them what was great, how they could have done better. It's really, really valuable for them. Secondly, if you would like to just take a look to the sponsors that we've had for the day, I mentioned these guys earlier, but it's really important that we realise that without these guys, an event like this just fiscally could not be possible. So just a shout out to Automatic, Braintree, Dev, which is that PayPal company, Microsoft, DP, or Digital Pacific, sorry, GitHub, Synology, Silverstripe, Server Grove, and DigitalOcean. So just a round of applause for our sponsors, please. Thank you. We would like to see some tweets coming out about your thoughts about the conference. If you've got a way to improve it, or you've got some cool photos or something like that, the hashtag is PHPOz15, so spelt PHP, Oz, OZ15. Put up some photos, tell us what you think, tell the world what you think, and we might run a couple of giveaways tomorrow, and we'll just select a couple of people from random who are using the hashtag, and give you some free things. So if I can't bribe you to tweet about it, I don't know what I can do. Finally, as the talks are going along, I'm guilty of this, so I'll just say it. As the talks are going along, you think of a really cool question, just jot it down on a note, although no one has pen and paper, so on your phone. And yeah, throw your hands up and get the talks firing at the end. It'd be handy to get a nice good discussion going, which for this next talk, I reckon we probably can. Okay, so we've got two talks coming up. One from Bashar Al Fallouji and Christopher Pitt. With 14 years of experience in software engineering and development, Bashar has a huge plethora of knowledge of being a software architect. He has a bachelor degree in information technology management, a master's degree in science, Zen certification, MySQL Sundays certification, Scrum, and TOGAF certifications. This guy's sort of got all the goods and the knowledge, and he's going to enlighten us on some testing and some awesome things associated. So please welcome. Thank you.
Hi, guys. Well, thanks for this nice introduction. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how to write code that is clean and easy to test. A few words about me. So I'm a solution architect at Essence.com. Essence.com, it's an online retailer. The slides will be available at this URL, but they also will be available on Joined In. And my area of interest, I'm passionate about web, about software engineering, computer engineering, but mostly web-related, and BI. So first, I said we'll talk about clean code. Clean being a word, so everyone has its own definition of what clean would mean. I'm pretty sure we won't necessarily all agree about what it means, but in my opinion, you could define clean as something code that is well structured. The structure makes a lot about how clean it is. It should be simple. If it's complex, it's most likely not clean. And there should be some consistency, something repeatable. When you write clean code, the first thing you have to do is start with a pen and a paper. Don't forget that step. We have a tendency of rushing in just coding. Take a few minutes, design your model, design a little bit the relationship between your entities or your class. Think about the bigger picture. That's the first step. When you do that, please keep in mind that usually you don't work alone. there are other people around you, and they will use whatever you built. So take that into consideration so they don't have those WTF moments when they look at what you produced, what you built. I don't know anyone who can read minds. I can't, so make things obvious. That's also very important. Don't assume they will know whatever you know or whatever you assumed. Let's take an example. So something that is really important when you write code or when you write an API, when you build an API, is making sure you call things the right way. Someone is going to consume this. So imagine you have this kind of function that you can consume. As a user, I know I can do an action, and I have to pass something, a variable. That doesn't really help me much, like if I have to use it, test it, or I don't know what to do with this. So, OK, cool. What action? What is var? If you go one step ahead, you start, OK, let's name it a little bit better. Let's say it's a hug. OK, cool. It's a hug, and you give it an array. OK, so var is an array. What does the array contain? What should I do with this? How do I build it? Do I hug an array? I mean, still there is a lot of unknown about that. The next step is really to go more specifically, use type hinting. You basically say, it's a hug. The action is a hug, and you give it a cat. Everyone is happy. The cat is happy. And it makes your API, it makes your function easy to use, easy to understand. I don't need to read a 10-page documentation to consume this. Type hinting, if there is no reason not to use it. It exists in PHP 5. It works with interface, class, array. It's also, most IDE will be compatible with it, so you get the auto-completion, the IntelliSense that will tell you basically what are the parameters that you need. And it forces you to think about what you are passing. It actually puts you into this mind of, OK, I have this class is dependent of that other class. It helps you to build a better class model. It's also letting the PHP engine do the work for you. If you're not passing the right thing, it's going to crash. And this is the kind of crash you want to see when you develop. So it makes it easier for you to basically debug or identify a bug or an issue. So this is great in terms of input. Use type hinting. You try to leverage. Now the output is also very important. For example, if you look at this simple function, so if we read it quickly, we can see, we give a person. That's great. And it seems to return a Boolean. It returns true if the person is an admin, and it returns false if it's a moderator. Do you guys see anything that you don't like about that? Is there anything that annoys you? Exactly. You don't have a guarantee, so sometimes you return just nothing. So that's annoying. That's annoying. That's like the beginning of bugs, because you're going to use this function somewhere else, and you have to consistently check that if it's not a Boolean, does it return something? And if it returns something, is it a Boolean? Is it true or false? It makes code harder to write. So make sure you have consistent output. Exception. If you don't use exception, you should. It exists since a long time. Don't use them. I mean, my suggestion for you is not use them for anything. Use them. I mean, exception should be used when on unexpected situations or when there is an error, when there is a problem. It's good to write exception. Make sure just to catch them. Otherwise, it's a bit, lost, or you're gonna. Your code will not finish completely. It will not terminate completely. And it's always good to not throw just general exception. If you can specify the nature of it, you can do that by either creating your own exception classes or by leveraging what you can find in the SPL. We'll talk about the SPL quickly later. So there are examples here like invalid argument exception, runtime exception, and you can also provide a code that would make sense in your application. For example, 100, 101, and you can manage those codes in your application. If you don't comment your code, you should. PHP doc being the standard. I hope everyone does that. Use interface. I mean, I've seen a lot of code where people there is a lot of duplication, a lot of duplicated code, where you would re-implement similar function, similar feature. At some point, you should think about what is common between all those pieces of code. And interface, I mean, in oriented object programming, that's what they do. They allow you to provide a common way to consume something, a service. It's also great when you want to build something modular or you want to build an application that is based on a plugin architecture. So you provide a way for anyone to come and say, OK, I want to write this new plugin. I just have to implement method X, Y, Z. I just need to implement this interface. And then, boom, I can extend. I can be part of the application. I can run within the application. And I think also using interface, it also puts you in this mind of enhancing the quality of the code, writing cleaner code. Namespace. So namespace exists since PHP 5.3. That's like, I think, 6 years. I think it's 2009, 5.3. I forgot, something like that. So there is really no reason not to use them. Why use namespace? You don't want, you want to avoid name collapsing. So usually in your application, you may at some point start using frameworks or other code. If your classes have a too generic name, you may just end collapse with their own names. It's also a good way to organize your code. You should, if you write an application, you should think about modularity, about package, and that's what namespace also forces you to do. So if you have models, they should be in a sub-package named models. If you have services, they should be in a sub-package that is named services. And also, what is great about namespace is in terms of testability. If you mix up namespace with factories, I will show you that later. You can actually inject like namespace into the factories as a parameter, and then have and then instantiate different objects depending if you are testing or not. So if you are testing, you would use a namespace that is specific for test, and if you are not, you could use the real ones. I will show you that later. There are some examples. That's like, I mean. What is wrong with this, in your opinion? What is wrong with that? So what does it do? Is valid email. You give an email, it does a preg match. OK, that's a good point. Well, that's my fault because there was no space. Sorry? That's a very good one. Good job. What about, exactly, what about .info, .asia, etc.? And why are you doing this? Why would you do that? That's the first thing. I mean, if you are using a framework, there is most likely 99.99% of chance there is something about that. And if you are not, PHP has all the filter function. There is the filter extension that is out of the box, that is inside any PHP release. It's by default. That provides things like that. This is you should be very careful with things like that. And we see them a lot in application where they try to reinvent some validation, etc. The actual regex that is used by PHP is like this long. If you go look at the source code, it's an horrible regex. It's unreadable. Don't try to read it. I mean, it's unreadable. And if you look at the RFC of email, that regex doesn't even cover all the cases that you can find in the RFC. I think I saw a benchmark, and it's like 99%. There's like still a few emails that should be validated as true that are not, but those are extreme cases that you will never find. I mean, most likely you will never find in your context. So don't do that. Make sure to go to the php.net, read the documentation. The amount of function is available and classes is huge. SPL. Who doesn't know what SPL is? Or who does know what SPL is? Let's do it the other way around. Who's using SPL? No? Ah, whoa. Yeah, or use it or knows about it. It's okay. Well, so it's part of PHP. It has been here around for a long time. And basically what it allows you is to solve some problems that we all have. Okay, so what kind of problem we can have? There can be problem related, like at some point you need a specific data structure, or you need to iterate, or you need to do things about related to file, how to handle some files, or you need some exceptions. Well, there are people who did the job for us, and they give us a bunch of structures, functions, classes, etc. For example, array iterator. If you write an object, if you create a new class, and this class, you want to give it the ability to iterate. It's an iterator. And you want to use, it's so nice to use the for each. We all love for each in PHP. It's very easy to use. You want to use the for each. By implementing array iterator, it's an interface, you can benefit from the for each. You can use the for each on your object. If you want to count, let's say you have an object and you want to apply a count on it because it contains, I don't know, a collection of things. And you can implement, there is also an interface named countable. If you implement it, then you can apply count on it. So this makes things, like easier. We can leverage what exists already and benefit for our own code. There are other things with the SPL, exceptions. Those are just examples, by the way. The whole documentation is much bigger. Instead of returning, if you write a method, and inside your method, at some point, you want to check that you're receiving the right argument. You are expecting to receive something, and if you don't receive that thing, you want to scream. So instead of returning just exception, you can actually use things like invalid argument exception, runtime, or there are things like runtime exception that are part of the SPL and makes things more explicit. There is also a data structure like the SPL fixed array. SPL fixed array, it's basically an ASOC array, but with a defined size. And it has the restriction of the key has to be a number. The key cannot be a string, or it has to be an indexed a number. The key has to be a number. But it's great for, in terms of memory and performance, if you have huge arrays and you have to do operation on them. And if you know their size, it's actually a better performance. So yeah. If you want the whole package, just go there. It's very big and take time to go through it. One thing also, when you write code that makes code a little bit buggy or less clean, let's say, you should never trust client data. I'm pretty sure you guys all are aware of that. If you don't have a special library for handling data sanitization or data validation, you can use filter var. It's part of PHP also. Provide different filters for sanitization, validation. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit. I just went through a bunch of different things to watch when you want to build clean code, between codes. There is also something that consistency. When you write clean code, you want some consistency. You want that people understand how you solve the problem. And I'm sure you all heard about design patterns. There are basically reusable solution to problems that we have every day. And it's a great, most framework, Laravel, Symfony, pretty much all framework have implementation of those design pattern, more than one design pattern actually. And I just want to go through quickly a few of those. Imagine you have the need, your boss comes and say, okay, we need to write a payment service, a payment API. And the partner that we have selected, we have PayPal Direct, we have BeanStream, we have VisaLink. Those are all payment providers. And you have to make sure that the app supports all of them. So when you hear those things, it should flag in your head. There should be like some alarms, flags. okay, he needs multiple implementation, doing basically the same stuff. I should be able to switch from one to another very easily. So you want to keep something current between all those implementation. How do you do that? What would be your reflex? Anyone want to try an answer? Or what would you do if you were that developer? Thank you. I wish I had gift I could throw. Yeah, exactly. It's really, so use interface. That's, you define exactly in your module or your API how it will be consumed, how it will be executed. If you want to switch from one implementation to another, you should use factories. You should really think about factories, letting factories handle object instantiation. And this will make it so you can drive the configuration, you can drive instantiation by a configuration file, for example. This makes your code easier to change or to evolve. This is an example of a factory. I mean, I'm pretty sure you guys know how to write one, but one of the things that I encourage you to do is that I find personally useful, at least for me, hopefully for you too, is introducing the namespace of the, making the namespace injectable into the factory. That's what I was referring earlier. Why I like that? I like that because it actually allows me to use always the same factory. And if at some point I want to use, like, I want to change the namespace and say, okay, I have a new version or something new, or whatever, I mean, whatever the context is, I can just, when I instantiate my factory, tell it, hey, this is a new space, new namespace I want to use, by the way. And it's going to start instantiating the classes from that new namespace. So I can kind of change the behavior of my code without having to refactor everything. It can be driven by a config. This namespace can be a configuration or whatever you want. Does that make sense? Or guys, okay. There are like plenty of other design patterns. I mean, I'm not going to go through all of them. Facade, decorator, singleton. I just want to say something about singleton. There is this big debate, it has been for a while about singleton. You know, is it good? Is it bad? I hate them. I love them. I mean, I'm not going to tell you don't use them or use them. You do whatever you want. You guys you take your own decision. But if you use them, just be careful. Just keep in mind, this is a singleton. Therefore, it's a global state. I mean, it's still like kind of a glorified global variable. And when it's a global state, it means that maybe some other piece of code in my application at some point before me or after me is going to modify it, do something about it. So all the assumption I make about it might be not true. Just keep in mind that. So it's fine to use singleton if your application, if the class is not altering the application. For example, a good example is a logger. Usually a logger, it's not gonna alterate the application itself. You're just pushing into the logger things, and he does things, but he doesn't really return something that would modify how the following code will be executed. You're not gonna check if logger or error returns this, then I do that. You don't do that. So in that case, it makes use of singleton a little bit less dangerous and more acceptable, but you should be very careful. There is also a problem is that singleton are very hard to test. Why? Because it's pretty much, we'll talk about that in a few slides, but it violates a law named the Law of Demeter. Basically, you can't inject them. You can't like really inject them. You can't use, I mean, yeah, we'll see. I'll show you. Law of Demeter. Do you guys know what this law? Have you ever heard about it? No? Yes? Yeah? Okay. So, I mean, it's a law. It's a guideline. You don't need to go crazy about it. But it's good to know, and it's good to try when you code to think about it. Just keep it in mind. Just say when you violate the law, you know that at least you did it, and you know why. You keep that in mind. What it says is basically that every class should only talk to their friends. They shouldn't talk to strangers. Okay? And it's basically, if you need something, you should have it. You should receive it. You can't, like, if a piece of code needs something, need another object for its execution, it should have it. You should pass it, basically. Let's take a real-life example. This is something, I'm sorry, I should have included the source. This is, I read somewhere, but I couldn't find sadly, I couldn't refer to the, so I'm sorry for the plagiat. I read that on the web, actually, this example. I didn't come up, but I can't find the source, so I cannot put the reference. So I apologize for the person who created that. Imagine you are in store and you want to purchase something that is worth $25. What would you do? Do you give to the clerk the wallet and say, okay, that's it? You take care? Or you give him 25 bucks? What would make sense? Obviously, answer number 2. You will never give your wallet and let him take the 25 bucks. So why do we do that in code? That's the thing. And you see that in many, I mean, I've seen that in many code. For example, here, I have a class named document. The constructor receives an URL. And then inside of the object constructor, I'm basically instantiating a new HTML client and then fetching the data of that URL and putting it inside of a property named HTML. So why does this violate the law of Demeter? First, the new operator that is here, this is a violation. I should have, instead of letting the constructor instantiating and doing the job of fetching, I should have provided the content directly. So basically, I should have done like that, something more simple. I have a class that is document, and that document, what does it contain? Contain HTML, in my case. So just pass the HTML. And don't care about how you get it. The responsibility of how to get that HTML is someone else. It's not yours in terms of the document class. Yeah, so basically each unit should only have a limited knowledge about the other units. And you only talk to your immediate friends. So a few examples of violation. For example, you have in the constructor, often they appear, I mean, well, they can appear anywhere, but you see often violation in the constructor. You have a class constructor and you do this bar, new bar. Why this is hard to test, in your opinion? Why this code is hard? It's not easy. Because, sorry, yeah? Exactly. You two guys are right. You can't inject, you rely on bar. You don't know what bar is. Why do I rely on bar? If I rely on something, why wasn't it given to me at first? Or this. This is another case where you have a class constructor. This bar, you have some God object that knows everything. And you ask him to give you an instance of bar. So what are the problems with that, in your opinion, guys? Exactly, yeah. And this is a big global state also, because God get instance, basically, I mean, I don't know. Is it always the same thing? Or do I get once an object, then I get an array, then I don't know what I get? You don't know what you're getting. And this is prone to bugs. This is when the bugs start. Usually in application, you start doing things like that. This is another case. So you have a class constructor, and you're passing John to the class constructor. And in the class constructor, what it does get do, get foo, get bar, to get bar. So this is also wrong, because, I mean, why did you do it like that? Like, just pass bar if you need bar. It doesn't make sense to have this kind of complexity. And this class should not have to worry about I need to get do, then get foo in order to get bar. I mean, this is too much knowledge. This is way, way too much things that you are assuming. So if get do change, everything breaks. Or if get foo behaves differently, your code breaks. So there is the law of Demeter has basically, I mean, the more you respect, what I found is that the more you respect the law of Demeter, the easier it makes the test. So it also forces you to do things like keep object instantiations simple. And this is also one thing that we see often in code, is that you start writing a class. The class is simple at the beginning, and with the time it gets more complicated, and it does more things, and you give him more responsibilities, so therefore it relies on more objects. Now it requires a database connection, then it requires, I don't know, an OAuth client, and then a socket or whatever. I mean, it starts to grow, 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 and you can see that in the class constructor often. You see our constructor grows, grows, grows. When you see that, you know something is wrong. You should stop, and you should challenge yourself. Say, oh, what's going on? Why is it growing like that? What I'm doing wrong? Can I do it the other way? Respecting the law of Demeter makes mocking object very easy, because you don't use new operator, you don't do all those things, so everything needs to be injected. I mean, it's also a big simplification in terms of the dependency graph, because you're not going to have, you're going to keep things simple, so you're not going to have your object depending on 30 other objects in order to work. Those are like a list. I'm pretty sure you guys know most of them, but it's always good to talk about them a little bit. Those are also other things that when you write code, when you see them, it should flag. There should be a flag that raises, and you should say, wow, how can I do that differently? Obviously, the use of globals. I mean, I hope you don't do that. Anything hard-coded. And sometimes it's like obvious, you know, like even IP address, and you assume that it will never change. Anything, I mean, long class or method. I mean, if you, there is a great tool by Sebastian Bergman. It's named PHP Lock, and you can, on his GitHub, you can download it. That gives you like a quick, some statistic about how many lines of code you have, how many are documented, how many comments you have, etc. This is a good thing to run against. If you have a code base and you don't know it, it's a good thing to run this, get a summary. It will give you a good idea of, oh crap, I have, I don't know, 20 classes that are 6,000 lines of codes each. There is something wrong. Deep structure. If you see too many curly brackets, something is wrong. It has to be, there has to be a way to simplify. Long names, long lines, obviously. Anything that takes more than 1-2 sentences to explain. If a class, a method, or anything takes more than that, there is a problem. Any copy-paste. And this is also, you have the tools to detect copy-paste. There is also, I think Sebastian Bergman also has a PHP CD, I think. The name is PHP CD. And it can detect if you have too many copy-paste in your code base. Any code that never use inheritance, interface, composition, basically you have classes, but they're all flat and they don't interact together. It should raise something. You should ask yourself, is that okay? Or, I mean, and maybe the answer is yes. I mean, I'm not saying if you see that, it means you have to rewrite. Maybe the answer is yes, but at least you should ask yourself the question, is that right, or am I missing something? When there is no validation, no input validation, and this is like, honestly, I think most of the time, I mean, most of the bugs is, I don't know what you guys think, but usually most of the bug happens because you assume something. You assume that something is right and it's not, and then it fails. And if you validate, most of the time you can make sure of that assumption. and avoid the bug. No comment and anything that gives you a headache. That's also a good sign. If you take too many aspirins, something is wrong. Other code smell. If you'll see classes with only or a lot of public static, like public static method, usually this is a sign of that. I have seen, for example, classes that have no state, just public static method. So basically, it's like a glorified toolbox. And maybe it's fine, again. Maybe it's OK. But you should ask yourself why there is a class like that. Why I have a class that has no state and just a bunch of static method. Because this is basically doing procedural programming using oriented object. That's what you did. Like, you don't need to instantiate a class. You're just hitting against static methods. Too many parameters in a method. Word orders for the parameters. Yeah, so I mean, please keep the optional parameters at the end. Sorry, that's the opposite. Sorry, I just realized I mixed up this is the opposite. You want the optional at the end and the mandatory at the beginning. What I call the God object. Have you guys, I haven't used Magento. I mean, I don't really like Magento, but I mean, I had like a long time ago a project with Magento, but it's like an old version. I can't recall even what version it was. But I remember there was an object named, I think, Mage, yeah, I think. And the Mage had like everything. This was the Mage, you know, like he was this great object that you could use anywhere and give you access to everything. This is horrible. You don't do that. Like, this is against any oriented object. I mean, don't do that. Please, just don't do that. And it may be sexy because you say, oh, it's so easy, but it's so easy to get whatever I need. Yeah, sure, but that's not the point, you know. You can just pass it. There are all the ways to achieve something easy. Second shell coupling. That means like things have to be done in a certain order in order to work. Perfect example. If I have to open, first I have to open a communication with something before sending. You know, so I cannot use my API before doing connect, and then I can do, so I have to do things in a certain order, you know. I have to do that, in order for things to work. I mean, you have to think, does that make sense to force a user to do it this way? Why do I have to do an init before doing a send? Things have to be obvious for the user. It doesn't seem like something necessarily obvious. If I instantiate an object, I would assume that after instantiation, I should be pretty much ready to use it, right? So why do I have to do those 3 extra steps before being able to do whatever I need to do? Things that are on unknown state, yeah. So this can be different things like you don't know, okay, like you have, I have seen that actually I have an example after. You have like a database object that is your PDO connection, basically, and you're making sure that the database is connected. And if it's not, you reconnect. This is weird. Why inside a method I have to check if I'm connected? And this is like all over the place. I've seen code where it's repeated. Every time there is something that is requested to the database, there is a check. Am I connected? And this, you know what? This smells like there was a bug at some point. And someone put it in Jira, and there is a developer who took it, was, oh, crap, we lost the DB. OK, let's just put this. And he put it everywhere, and then it fixed the bug. And that's it. This is the kind of, usually, the origin of things like that. So we have time to do some case study. So I have some examples. And feel free, I mean, to raise your hand and say, if you see something wrong. So, OK, so this is supposed to be a transition. OK, it didn't work. So if you look at this, this is some piece of code. So we discussed a lot of things, and let's try to apply them right now. Let's try to apply them in this piece of code. So first thing, we have a class named functions that has a method named setImageInDB. And it receives a DB, a product code, a value. Okay? And I'm not going to read everything, but if I look at the end, it seems to return a Boolean. Okay. All right, cool. So first thing is functions. That's a cool name, all right? I should. Everyone wants that name. Everyone wants to name his class function. So it doesn't really, help. You don't really know what's the context here. Then, what is it that you don't like? Let's make you participate. What is it that you don't like here? There are so many things. Sorry? Sorry, yeah? You said? Right. There is not. You don't know the return. You don't necessarily have a clear output. Exactly. What else? Sorry? There is no typed in the parameter. You're right. You're giving a DB. You're giving a resource. Why is it this type? I'm pretty sure this is an object. What else? Yes. Yes, very good point. Yep. All those good points. What else? What else do you see, guys?
The comparison in value is not strict.
The comparison is not strict, so you don't. And we all know what happens with PHP and the inherent. Thank you. The inherent, like how it automatically casts things and what kind of situation it can create. We all have been victim of those bugs, right? Yeah. Anyone else? Thank you. Yeah, no filter validation. SQL injection, right? Yeah.
It says it sets an image in DB, but where's the image is not understandable.
Thank you. What the hell? Thanks. Yeah, no, but this is good. This is exactly. So, you guys have done. I'm happy. So it means you listened a little bit. So yeah, those are very good points. So set image in DB. What does that do? You don't even know what it does. I'm a user. Set image in DB. Am I pushing the image in DB or what I'm doing? Exactly. What are the input parameters? It's not clear. Value. What happens if value equals Bob Marley? Well, what happens? I'd still go inside because Bob Marley evaluates as 1. It evaluates as true. So it's, yeah, those are weird things. Or even worse, Bob Marley, drop table, etc. Reset the database. What is it? I don't know. I'm scared a little bit. Am I going to drop everything, or what I'm doing here? Exactly, the SQL injection. So yeah, please make sure to validate. So this returns a Boolean again sometimes. What if value equals 10? Then you don't go inside. And yeah. So that's like a lot of things to clean, and if we apply all those rules that we saw earlier, we can see that there are at least eight improvements that could be done in order to make this code a little bit more solid. Okay, I think we have time. Do we? How much? Yeah, okay. Is it good? Yeah. So this is another one. Actually, maybe I will take, because I don't have much time, so we'll take someone a little bit more. Okay, this one. And this is real code. I didn't have to. This is actually code that I didn't have to write it. I just copy-pasted it. Function HTML special char modify, because the real one is not good enough. And so basically, you give a string, and then it does a bunch of replacements and returns the string, as long as the string has a length bigger than 0. Okay. So again, PHP.NET documentation. There is, yeah. Why? Basically, why? I don't know what. Let's find another one. This thing. You have a class named customer. It has an ID, first name, last name, email. It has a bunch of save functions, save to DB. What is it that you don't like here, guys? Sorry? Various implementation. And what is customer? If you had to give, what type of class is customer? Is it like, can we say that it's a structure? It defines an entity, a structure. So it seems like I define some structure, something like an entity or a model that I need to manipulate in my application. So this is great. I make a class that is named customer. Good. And it has those properties. Why does customers has to be aware on how to save itself in all those different, in all those different layers and system? This is way too much responsibility. This is, in my opinion, way too much responsibility. This is like not even, this is not even an active record. This is like a super active record because it knows to save everywhere. So you should split things. When you see something like that, it should raise a flag. Oh my God, this is multiple implementation. I can implement a design pattern for that, use a factory, define an interface, and then delegate the responsibility of saving to another class. Separate concerns. Do I need to? What is wrong here? Oops, sorry. Sorry for that. So you have pattern 1, pattern 2, and it frag match both of them, and then return. Yeah, well, that's a very limited, simplified regex of what an URL can be. Yeah, don't do that. I have other examples, but maybe I'll give just like 2-3 minutes for questions. I don't know if you guys, yeah, please.
Can you head back to the injecting the namespace part?
Yeah.
In there, I was just curious, that was an interface, and so if you upgrade one thing, your PayPal, and then you change the namespace, it'll change it for all of the other things?
Oh, well, basically, I mean, the way I use, I mean, there are different ways of doing things. I'm not telling, but I'm just giving you like ideas. That's it. The way I use this personally is that I instantiate a factory. My abstract factory, I didn't put the code here, but my abstract factory, there is a constructor class. And when you construct it, you can specify the namespace, the base namespace. And this base namespace basically is going to, if I want to change it, if I want to change, like I have a test, I don't know, or whatever, I want, at some point, I want to switch to something else, I can just do it when I instantiate my factory. Then afterwards, the code, the rest of the code that receives the factory, etc., will actually instantiate the other object, if you want, the new object, or you see, the object in the new namespace instead of, so it makes my code easy to change without having to go through in every method and rewriting things. Does that make sense, or?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's more like with modern IDEs, I just wonder how nice that would play with PHP Storm and that sort of stuff when that refactoring side of things is much easier, just leveraging an IDE rather than injecting namespaces and that sort of stuff. I'm just curious about that.
It's because, I see your point. Imagine you have 10 other classes that receive that factory, and they do factory get, factory create object, PayPal direct, or whatever. You will have, if you don't use something like that, if you don't make the namespace configurable somehow, you're going to actually have to go inside of those class and modify the code, or modify the aliases. You know, usually you have the use. You're going to say use that namespace as PayPal direct. You know, you're going to have to modify those classes. I want to avoid that. So what I make is I remove, basically, I remove this and make it, and let the factory handle that and make the factory configurable, namespace configurable. And you know, you have those a lot in many frameworks. You know, there are many frameworks where you can specify, for example, in a config file, what extension you want, what kind of extension class you want. You say, I want this, and you give a name, a full namespace, a full class with all the whole namespace. If tomorrow you want to change, just go into the config file, modify it, change. It's the same spirit. It's basically the same spirit. It accomplishes the same goal. Just make, So if you want to modify something quick, you don't have to go through 25 files. That's it. Yeah. Yeah. Many ways of, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, please.
With the law of Demeter, dealing with exceptions and catching exceptions and throwing your own. So we've come across problems where we're using a third-party library, and then that's using other libraries, and then somewhere it throws an exception. And so when you're trying to test that you're catching them all, you've got no idea what exceptions are going to be thrown. So all you can do is catch the base exception. So should you be catching that in your own and then throwing something so that you can document exactly what exceptions always get thrown up?
There is no, I don't think, I don't think there is really a clear guideline. Really, it depends on the case. I think sometimes you may want to catch, when to catch the exception, it really depends on your application. It's very hard to give you a guideline to tell you, okay, you catch it, I don't know, usually, you know, in your application, there is a stack that is executed, and you have to choose, like, you have to say, okay, at some point in my stack, I am consuming that class, so this is where it makes sense to catch it, because I know this class, I read the documentation, I can see that it may throw exception, so I catch it here. You could catch it at a higher level or lower level. You can modify this, but there is no, I don't think there is really a guideline on how, at least I don't know one on when to do things. I think it's more like what makes sense depending on the context, and this is very subjective, I know.
Because doesn't that mean, though, your class needs to be aware of the exceptions that can be thrown all the way down the chain? And
that's fine. Usually if you consume a service, you should know that there is an exception that can be thrown. Okay, if I consume service A throws an exception, I should be aware about that. And if that exception was thrown because service A used service B that was the one who threw it, it still should be in the documentation. I'm still receiving that exception. You see, the origin, it's not because there was 5 levels of
well, that's I guess my question is, the case we've got is that it's like 5 levels deep is throwing the exception, and it's not documented by the library that we're interfacing with. And so then you need to dig through and find out that eventually it was curl that threw an exception. And
that's an example of poor documentation. Sadly, if it was not documented and you just ended up in it and you're like, oh my God, they didn't think about it, then you have to cover for them. You pretty much have to cover for, because they're not doing it. Yeah.
But if you're not catching those exceptions and throwing them, then you've got to document someone else's exceptions, and then the next person has to document your exceptions and their exceptions. And
if I use a library, I consume a library, and I consume it, and I'm consuming, I don't know, service X, and then service X may throw an exception. I should either take care of it, transform it, or document it. But if I don't do any of those, that's not a really good code, because I am not telling you, I'm hiding things from you. Basically, you are a user, and you don't know. You don't know that I'm not doing my job, and I'm not letting you know that I'm not doing it. That's not really nice from me. You see my point?
Okay.
So you're compensating for them.
So if you're using service X, you know throws an exception, you should document that.
Yes.
That exception could be thrown.
Yes, or you should handle it. Yeah. Either catch it and handle it, but you should do something about it. Yes. Yeah. So I think I'm done. So thanks, guys. I hope I didn't make you bore you too much, and thank you. Thanks.